Right now, as you're watching this, your mind is doing something that's completely sabotaging every affirmation you've ever spoken. And the crazy part? Nobody taught you this was happening. You've been told to repeat positive statements, to convince yourself of what you want, to force your mind to believe something new. But here's what they never told you. Every time you affirm something you don't currently experience, your mind immediately starts building a case against it. Think about it. When you say, "I am confident," what's the first thing that happens in your head? Your mind instantly starts scanning for evidence of all the times you weren't confident. When you declare, "I am wealthy," your brain immediately points to your bank account, your bills, your financial stress. This isn't you being negative or broken. This is your mind doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's trying to keep you aligned with reality as it currently knows it. But what if I told you that this entire approach, this whole method of trying to convince your mind of something, is backwards? What if the very act of affirming is actually reinforcing the gap between where you are and where you want to be? What if there's a completely different way, a method so simple yet so powerful that it bypasses all this mental resistance entirely? Welcome to the Observer Method, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at affirmations the same way again. In fact, you might never need to use traditional affirmations again, because what I'm about to share with you operates on a completely different level of consciousness. Here's what's happening every time you try to affirm your way to a new reality. Your conscious mind, the part that wants to change, speaks these positive words. But your subconscious mind, which controls about 95% of your daily experience, sits there like a fact-checker, immediately pulling up every piece of contradicting evidence it has stored. This creates what I call the affirmation war. Your conscious and subconscious minds literally fighting each other every time you try to create positive change. Most people think the solution is to affirm harder, longer, or more convincingly. They think if they just repeat something enough times with enough emotion, they'll eventually break through this resistance. But here's the problem with that approach. Resistance grows stronger when you push against it. The harder you try to convince your subconscious of something it doesn't currently accept, the more evidence it will gather to prove you wrong. This is why you can spend months or even years repeating the same affirmations and still find yourself in the exact same circumstances. It's not because affirmations don't work, it's because you're using them backwards. You're trying to force a new belief into a mind that's programmed to reject anything that doesn't match its current understanding of reality. But what if, instead of trying to convince your mind of something new, you simply observed what was already there? What if, instead of fighting with your current reality, you learned to witness it from a place of complete neutrality? This is where the Observer Method begins, and it's where everything changes. The Observer Method isn't about positive thinking or negative thinking. It's about no thinking. It's about stepping back into the part of you that watches thoughts rather than being controlled by them. It's about discovering that you are not your thoughts, you are not your current circumstances, and you are certainly not the story your mind tells about who you are and what's possible for you. Throughout this video, we're going to dive deep into 12 specific areas that will completely transform how you approach personal change. First, we'll expose the hidden force in your mind that fights every positive statement you make and why this force exists in the first place. You'll discover the secret courtroom inside your head where every affirmation gets put on trial and why this court almost always rules against you. Then we'll introduce you to the observer, the part of your consciousness that's been watching your entire life unfold but has never been given control. This observer doesn't need to believe anything, doesn't need to convince anyone of anything, and doesn't struggle with resistance because it operates from pure awareness rather than wishful thinking. We'll explore the neutral zone, a space of consciousness where transformation happens effortlessly because there's no conflict between what is and what could be. You'll learn why watching beats forcing every single time, and how to shift from desperate affirmations to calm observation of what already exists within you. I'll give you 3 specific observer techniques that you can start using immediately, methods that work with your mind's natural design rather than against it. These aren't just concepts or theories, they're practical tools that will begin shifting your reality the moment you apply them. We'll also address what happens when your old patterns try to fight back, because they will. Your mind has invested years or decades in maintaining your current reality, and it won't give up easily. But when you understand how to work with this resistance instead of against it, even the pushback becomes part of your transformation. Perhaps most importantly, we'll explore how to live from observer consciousness on a daily basis. This isn't about doing a technique for 10 minutes a day and hoping for results. This is about fundamentally shifting how you operate in the world. It's about discovering that you don't need to believe your way into a new reality because you can observe your way into it instead. The observer method works because it aligns with how consciousness actually functions, rather than how we've been told it should function. When you stop trying to convince your mind and start witnessing from your true nature, resistance disappears, not because you've overcome it, but because there's nothing left to resist. Your mind can argue with statements. It cannot argue with observation. Your subconscious can reject beliefs. It cannot reject awareness itself. This is the key that unlocks everything, and it's been available to you this entire time. You just didn't know how to access it. So here's what I want you to do as we go through this together. Don't try to believe what I'm sharing with you. Don't try to make it work or force it to make sense. Instead, simply observe your own experience as we explore these concepts. Notice what happens in your mind when you stop trying to change and start witnessing instead. Notice the difference between efforting and allowing, between convincing and observing. The observer method isn't another technique to add to your collection. It's a return to your natural state of being. It's remembering that before you learned to think your way through life, you were already whole, already complete, already everything you're trying to become through affirmations. Are you ready to stop affirming backwards and start observing your way into the reality you truly desire? Then let's begin with understanding exactly why your current approach has been sabotaging you from the very start. There's an invisible army living inside your mind, and its only job is to prove you wrong. Every time you speak an affirmation, this army mobilizes instantly. It doesn't care about your dreams, your goals, or how desperately you want to change your life. Its mission is simple: maintain the status quo at all costs. This force has a name. It's called your reticular activating system, but you can think of it as your reality police. And right now, it's working against every positive statement you make because it's been programmed to keep you exactly where you are. Here's how this invisible force operates. The moment you say, "I am successful," it immediately starts searching through your memory banks for every failure, every rejection, every time you didn't measure up. It's not being mean, it's being protective. Your brain believes that keeping you aligned with your current reality is the safest thing to do, even if that reality is making you miserable. This system evolved over millions of years to keep humans alive. If our ancestors suddenly believed they were stronger than they actually were, they might challenge a predator and get eaten. If they convinced themselves they could fly, they might jump off a cliff. So your brain developed this incredible fact-checking mechanism to keep you grounded in what it perceives as reality. But here's the problem. Your brain can't tell the difference between a physical threat and a mental limitation. It treats your desire to become wealthy with the same protective instinct it would use to stop you from walking into traffic. To your subconscious mind, changing your identity feels just as dangerous as jumping off a building. This is why affirmations create what researchers call cognitive dissonance. You're essentially asking your brain to hold two conflicting pieces of information at the same time. The conscious you that says, I am confident, and the subconscious you that has evidence of every awkward conversation. Every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. Every moment you felt small or invisible. Your mind hates cognitive dissonance. It will do anything to resolve this conflict, and guess which side usually wins? The side with more evidence, the side with more emotional charge, the side that's been running your life for years or decades. Your current reality always has more proof than your desired reality. So your current reality wins every single time, but this hidden force doesn't just collect evidence against your affirmations. It actively seeks out more proof that you're not who you're trying to become. If you're affirming abundance while feeling broke, your reticular activating system will start noticing every bill, every empty bank account notification, every expensive thing you can't afford. It's literally training your awareness to focus on lack. If you're trying to affirm confidence while feeling insecure, this system will highlight every awkward moment, every time someone seems more put together than you, every situation where you feel out of place. It's not trying to torture you. It's trying to keep you safe by proving that your current self-image is accurate. This is why people often feel worse after doing affirmations. They're not just fighting their circumstances, they're fighting their own mind's protective mechanism. Every positive statement becomes a battle, and battles are exhausting. You end up spending more energy trying to convince yourself than you would if you just accepted where you are right now. The really tricky part about this hidden force is that it's incredibly sophisticated. It doesn't just look for obvious contradictions. It examines your tone of voice when you speak affirmations. It analyzes the doubt in your energy. It notices the desperation behind your positive words. If there's any incongruence between what you're saying and what you're feeling, this force will use that incongruence as evidence that you're lying to yourself. Think about what happens when you try to affirm something you desperately want but don't currently have. There's usually an emotional charge around it, a neediness, a grasping quality. Your hidden force picks up on this immediately. It recognizes that you wouldn't need to affirm having something if you actually had it. The very act of affirming becomes proof that you don't possess what you're claiming to possess. This creates what I call the affirmation paradox. The more you need an affirmation to be true, the less likely your mind is to accept it. The more desperately you want to change, the more resistance you create. The harder you try to convince yourself, the more evidence your brain finds to maintain your current identity. But here's what's really fascinating about this hidden force. It's not actually your enemy. It's just doing its job based on outdated programming. It's operating from a survival mechanism that worked perfectly when humans lived in caves and faced physical dangers every day. But in the modern world, this same mechanism keeps you trapped in mental and emotional patterns that no longer serve you. The force fighting your affirmations isn't malicious, it's mechanical. It's following a simple program. Maintain consistency with past experience, avoid anything that feels unfamiliar or threatening, and keep the humans safe by keeping them exactly as they are. This program runs automatically, below the level of your conscious awareness, which is why you can't simply think your way past it. You can't argue with this force because it operates faster than thought. By the time you consciously speak an affirmation, your reticular activating system has already scanned your entire database of memories and found every piece of contradicting evidence. The resistance is already there before you even finish your positive statement. You can't overpower this force through repetition because repetition just gives it more opportunities to gather evidence against you. Every time you repeat an affirmation that doesn't match your current experience, you're giving this system another chance to prove you wrong. You can't sneak past this force with clever wording or emotional intensity because it's monitoring your energy, not just your words. It can sense the gap between what you're saying and what you're feeling, and it uses that gap as proof that you're not being authentic. So what can you do? How do you work with a force that seems designed to keep you stuck exactly where you are? This is where most people give up on personal development altogether. They conclude that change is impossible, that they're broken, or that positive thinking is just wishful thinking. But there's another way, a way that doesn't fight this force, but transcends it entirely. The observer method works because it operates from a different level of consciousness than your reticular activating system. Instead of trying to convince this force that you're something different, you learn to observe from a place that's already beyond its influence. Instead of fighting with your mind's protective mechanism, you discover the part of you that watches the mechanism without being controlled by it. This hidden force can only resist what it perceives as a threat to your current identity. But the observer isn't trying to change your identity. It's simply witnessing what's already true. And when you learn to observe from this space, something remarkable happens. The force that was fighting your every word suddenly has nothing left to fight. Every single affirmation you speak gets dragged into a mental courtroom you never knew existed. And in this courtroom, you're not the judge, you're the defendant. Your positive statements are put on trial, cross-examined, and almost always found guilty of being false. The verdict? Your current reality wins, your desired reality loses, and you stay exactly where you are. This courtroom operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without you ever being consciously aware of it. The moment you declare, "I am loved," the court is in session. When you affirm, "I am prosperous," the trial begins. And here's the devastating part. This court has never once ruled in favor of a statement that contradicts your current experience. Let me walk you through exactly how this mental trial unfolds, because understanding this process is the key to understanding why traditional affirmations fail so spectacularly for most people. First, there's the prosecution. This is the part of your mind that immediately jumps up to argue against your affirmation. The prosecution doesn't need to prepare a case because it has years or decades of evidence already compiled. When you say, "I am confident," the prosecution instantly presents Exhibit A, that time you stumbled over your words in a meeting. Exhibit B, when you avoided eye contact with someone attractive. Exhibit C, every moment you felt small, invisible, or inadequate. The prosecution is relentless and thorough. It doesn't just present big, obvious contradictions. It brings up the subtle evidence too. The tone of your voice when you spoke that affirmation, was there doubt in it? The feeling in your body when you said those words, was there tightness, resistance, or disbelief? The prosecution uses everything, and it builds an airtight case that your affirmation is nothing more than wishful thinking. Then there's the defense. This is your conscious mind trying desperately to argue for your new statement. But here's the problem. The defense is severely outgunned. While the prosecution has a mountain of experiential evidence, the defense only has hope, desire, and intention. The defense might argue, "But we really want this to be true," or "We've been working on ourselves," or "We deserve better than our current situation." The defense means well, but hope is not evidence in this courtroom. Desire is not proof. Wanting something desperately doesn't make it true in the mind's legal system. The defense keeps presenting emotional arguments while the prosecution keeps presenting factual evidence. And facts always win over feelings in this particular court. The judge in this courtroom is your subconscious mind, and it operates on one simple principle: maintain consistency with established patterns. This judge doesn't care about your dreams, your potential, or what you think you deserve. Its only concern is keeping you aligned with what it believes to be true based on your past experience. This judge has seen thousands of cases just like yours. It has watched person after person try to affirm their way into a new reality, and it has seen the same pattern over and over again. Big declarations followed by no real change. Positive statements followed by contradictory actions. Hopeful words followed by the same old results. So when your affirmation comes before this court, the judge is already skeptical. The jury in this courtroom is made up of all your past experiences, your memories, your conditioning, and your learned limitations. This jury doesn't deliberate for long because the verdict seems obvious to them. They've lived through your entire life story, and they know what's realistic for someone like you. When the prosecution presents all that evidence of who you've been, the jury nods in agreement. When the defense argues for who you could become, the jury rolls their collective eyes. Here's what makes this courtroom so powerful. It operates below your conscious awareness, which means you can't simply decide to overrule its decisions. You might consciously believe in your affirmations, but if this subconscious court finds them guilty of being false, your behavior, your energy, and your results will align with the court's ruling, not your conscious beliefs. This is why you can spend months affirming abundance while continuing to make decisions from scarcity. Your conscious mind might believe, "I am wealthy," but if the subconscious court ruled that statement false, you'll continue to act, feel, and choose from your established pattern of lack. The court's verdict becomes your reality, regardless of what you consciously tell yourself. The really insidious part about this mental courtroom is that it's designed to be self-reinforcing. Every time an affirmation gets shot down, that becomes more evidence for the prosecution to use in future trials. Every time you fail to manifest what you're affirming, the judge becomes more convinced that these positive statements are just fantasies. The court gets stricter and more cynical with each case. This is why people often report that affirmations worked at first, but stopped working over time. In the beginning, the courtroom might give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you get a few small victories that seem to validate your positive statements. But as time goes on and the big changes don't materialize, the court becomes less and less willing to entertain your declarations. The prosecution gets stronger, the defense gets weaker, and the verdicts become more predictable. You might think the solution is to gather more evidence for the defense. Maybe if you accomplish small goals, celebrate minor victories, or collect positive feedback from others, you can build a stronger case for your affirmations. But here's the problem with that approach. You're still operating within the courtroom system. You're still trying to prove your case to a judge that's fundamentally biased toward maintaining your current identity. Even when you do manage to collect some evidence for positive change, the prosecution adapts. It argues that these victories are temporary, flukes, or not representative of who you really are. It finds ways to minimize your progress and maximize your setbacks. The court is incredibly creative when it comes to maintaining the status quo. Some people try to overwhelm this courtroom with sheer volume. They think if they just repeat their affirmations more often, with more emotion, for longer periods of time, they can eventually wear down the opposition. But frequency doesn't change facts in this mental legal system. Saying something 1,000 times doesn't make it more true if the fundamental evidence contradicts it. Others try to sneak past this courtroom by using clever affirmations that seem harder to argue against. Instead of "I am rich," they say, "I am open to receiving abundance." Instead of "I am confident," they say, "I am becoming more confident every day." But this court is too sophisticated for these semantic tricks. It examines the energy behind your words, not just the words themselves. The truth is, as long as you're operating within this courtroom system, as long as you're trying to convince your subconscious mind of something through statements and declarations, you're playing a game that's rigged against you. The court is designed to maintain your current reality, and it has every tool necessary to do that job effectively. But what if you could step outside this courtroom entirely? What if there was a way to bypass this whole legal system and operate from a place where trials, evidence, and verdicts are irrelevant? What if you could access a part of yourself that doesn't need to prove anything because it simply observes what is? This is where the observer method becomes revolutionary. Instead of trying to win cases in a rigged courtroom, you learn to step into the role of the court reporter, the one who simply records what happens without getting involved in the legal proceedings. And from that neutral space of pure observation, everything changes. There's a part of you that has been silently watching your entire life unfold, and it has never once argued with reality. It has never fought with your circumstances, never resisted your experiences, and never tried to convince anyone of anything. This part of you has been present for every moment of your existence. Yet most people live their entire lives without ever consciously accessing its power. This is your observer, and it's about to change everything you think you know about creating transformation in your life. Your observer isn't a concept or a technique. It's a fundamental aspect of your consciousness. Right now, as you're absorbing these words, something in you is aware that you're aware. Something is witnessing your thoughts about what I'm saying. Something is noticing your mental reactions, your emotional responses, your body's sensations. That something is your observer, and it operates from a completely different dimension than your thinking mind. Here's what makes your observer so powerful. It exists outside the courtroom we just explored. It doesn't participate in trials, doesn't present evidence, and doesn't argue cases. It simply witnesses what is happening without any need to change, fix, or improve anything. And because it doesn't resist reality, reality doesn't resist it back. Think about this carefully. Every struggle you've ever had with affirmations, every battle you've fought with your limiting beliefs, every frustrating attempt to change your mindset, all of that happened at the level of thought. Your thinking mind tried to convince your other thinking mind of something different, but the observer operates beyond thought entirely. Your observer is like a mirror. A mirror doesn't judge what it reflects. It simply shows what's there. If someone beautiful looks into it, the mirror doesn't take credit. If someone unattractive looks into it, the mirror doesn't try to hide the image. It just reflects perfectly, without attachment, without resistance, without any agenda to change what it sees. This is how your observer functions. It witnesses your thoughts without being your thoughts. It watches your emotions without being controlled by your emotions. It observes your current circumstances without being limited by your current circumstances. And from this space of pure awareness, something remarkable becomes possible. When you operate from your observer, you're no longer trying to change your reality, you're simply noticing it. And here's the mysterious part that most people never discover. When you truly observe something without resistance, without trying to fix it or improve it, that thing begins to shift on its own. Not because you're forcing change, but because pure observation itself is a transformative force. Your observer has access to information that your thinking mind completely misses. While your conscious mind gets caught up in the story of your limitations, your observer sees the awareness in which that story appears. While your emotions react to circumstances, your observer notices the spaciousness that contains all emotions. While your thoughts argue with reality, your observer recognizes the peace that exists beyond all arguments. This is why the observer method works when affirmations don't. Affirmations operate from the level of mental content. They're trying to replace one thought with another thought. But the observer operates from the level of consciousness itself. It's the awareness that makes all thoughts possible in the first place. Let me give you a direct experience of your observer right now. Notice that you're reading these words. Now notice that something in you is aware that you're reading. That awareness of your awareness, that's your observer. It's not thinking about reading. It's not analyzing what you're learning. It's simply aware that the activity of reading is happening. Now notice any thoughts you're having about this concept. Maybe you're thinking this makes sense, or I'm not sure I understand, or how is this different from just paying attention? Whatever thoughts are arising, notice that something in you is aware of those thoughts. That awareness isn't another thought. It's the conscious space in which thoughts appear and disappear. This conscious space, your observer, has been present for every experience you've ever had. But it has never been changed by any of those experiences. It was aware when you were a child, and it's aware now. It was present during your happiest moments and your most difficult challenges. It has witnessed every success and every failure without being affected by any of them. Your observer doesn't have a personal history because it exists outside the stream of personal experience. It doesn't have limiting beliefs because it's the awareness in which all beliefs arise. It doesn't have emotional baggage because it's the space that contains all emotions without being disturbed by them. This is why operating from your observer is so powerful. You're accessing a part of yourself that's inherently free from all the conditioning that keeps you stuck. When you try to affirm from your thinking mind, you're operating from within your personal story. You're trying to convince the character in your life movie that they're different than they appear to be. But when you observe from your observer, you're stepping into the role of the movie screen itself, the unchanging awareness on which all personal stories appear. The movie screen isn't affected by whether it's showing a comedy or a tragedy, a success story or a tale of struggle. It remains perfectly neutral, perfectly present, perfectly unaffected. Your observer is like that screen. It can witness any experience without being limited by that experience. This is the key difference between the observer method and every other approach to personal transformation. Traditional methods try to change the content of your experience, your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions, your circumstances. The observer method helps you recognize the consciousness in which all content appears, and from that recognition, content begins to transform naturally. Your observer doesn't need to believe anything because it directly perceives what is. It doesn't need to have faith because it operates from knowing. It doesn't need to overcome resistance because it doesn't create resistance in the first place. When you truly observe something without trying to change it, you're meeting it with complete acceptance. And acceptance dissolves resistance immediately. Here's what happens when you begin to operate from your observer consciousness regularly. First, you stop fighting with your current reality. Instead of trying to convince yourself that you're something different, you simply notice what's actually present right now. This immediately ends the exhausting internal battle that characterizes most people's relationship with personal development. Second, you begin to see that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, and not your current circumstances. You recognize that you are the awareness that witnesses all of these things. This shift in identity is profound because it means you're no longer trying to change yourself. You're recognizing what you truly are beyond all the layers of conditioning. Third, you discover that transformation happens effortlessly when you stop trying to force it. When you observe your limiting patterns without judgment, they begin to dissolve on their own. When you witness your stuck emotions without trying to fix them, they naturally begin to flow and release. When you notice your constrained circumstances without resistance, new possibilities start to emerge organically. Your observer has been waiting your entire life for you to discover it. It has been patiently witnessing every attempt you've made to change yourself through thinking, and it has been ready all along to show you a completely different way. The observer method isn't about learning something new. It's about returning to what you've always been, underneath all the layers of acquired limitation. In the next chapter, we'll explore exactly how to activate your observer consciousness and begin using it to transform your reality without effort, without resistance, and without the need to convince anyone, including yourself, of anything at all. Everything you've been taught about creating change in your life is backwards. You've been told to push, to force, to make things happen through sheer willpower and determination. You've been taught to fight your limitations, overcome your resistance, and power through your obstacles. But what if the secret to transformation is the exact opposite? What if the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all? This goes against everything our action-obsessed culture teaches us. We're told that if we want something badly enough, we need to hustle for it, grind for it, sacrifice for it. We're conditioned to believe that change requires effort, that growth demands struggle, and that anything worth having must be fought for. But the observer method reveals a completely different truth. The most profound transformations happen when you stop trying to make them happen. Here's the paradox that most people never discover. The harder you try to change something, the more you reinforce its current state. When you fight with your limiting beliefs, you give them more energy. When you struggle against your stuck patterns, you actually strengthen them. When you force yourself to think positive thoughts, you create more resistance than transformation. Think about what happens when you try to force yourself to fall asleep. The more effort you put into sleeping, the more awake you become. The harder you try to relax, the more tense you feel. The more you focus on not thinking, the more thoughts flood your mind. Force creates counterforce, and this principle applies to consciousness as much as it applies to physics. Your mind operates like water. It flows naturally when there are no obstructions, but it becomes turbulent when you try to push it in a particular direction. When you attempt to force new thoughts, beliefs, or states of being, you're essentially trying to push water uphill. It's possible with enough effort, but it's exhausting, unsustainable, and it requires constant maintenance. Watching, on the other hand, is like removing the obstacles that block water's natural flow. When you simply observe your current thoughts without trying to change them, those thoughts begin to move and shift on their own. When you witness your stuck emotions without fighting them, they naturally begin to flow and release. When you notice your limiting patterns without forcing them to be different, they start to dissolve through the power of pure awareness. This happens because consciousness has a natural tendency toward expansion, growth, and evolution. Just like a plant naturally grows toward the light without effort, your awareness naturally moves toward greater freedom when you stop interfering with its movement. The problem is, most people are so busy trying to direct their growth that they block their natural expansion. Here's how forcing works in the realm of consciousness. When you force an affirmation, you create tension between what you're saying and what you're actually experiencing. This tension feels uncomfortable, so your mind either rejects the affirmation entirely or goes into overdrive, trying to make it true. Either way, you're operating from stress, strain, and struggle rather than from natural flow. When you force yourself to think positive thoughts, you're essentially putting a happy mask over your authentic experience. This might work temporarily, but it requires constant energy to maintain. Eventually, the mask slips, and you find yourself back where you started, often feeling worse because you've been pretending rather than transforming. When you force yourself to believe something your experience contradicts, you split yourself in two. Part of you tries to hold on to the forced belief, while another part of you knows it's not authentic. This internal conflict drains your energy and creates the kind of cognitive dissonance that makes transformation feel impossible. But watching operates from a completely different principle. When you watch your thoughts without trying to change them, you're approaching them with curiosity rather than force. This curiosity creates space around your thoughts, and in that space, they naturally begin to shift. You're not making them change. You're simply providing the conditions that allow change to occur organically. When you watch your emotions without trying to fix them, you're meeting them with acceptance rather than resistance. This acceptance allows the emotions to move through you naturally instead of getting stuck in patterns of suppression or expression. The emotion completes its cycle and dissolves on its own. When you watch your limiting patterns without trying to overcome them, you're observing them with awareness rather than judgment. This awareness illuminates the pattern so clearly that it begins to lose its unconscious hold over you. You're not fighting the pattern. You're bringing it into the light of consciousness where it can transform naturally. The power of watching comes from the fact that pure awareness is inherently transformative. Just like darkness disappears when you shine a light on it, unconscious patterns dissolve when you bring conscious attention to them. You don't have to do anything to the darkness. The presence of light is enough. This is why the observer method is so much more effective than traditional approaches. Instead of trying to change your experience, You're simply becoming fully present with whatever is happening right now. Instead of fighting with reality, you're meeting it with complete acceptance. And paradoxically, this acceptance creates the space for authentic transformation to occur. Here's what happens when you shift from forcing to watching. First, the internal struggle stops. When you're no longer trying to be different than you are, you can finally relax into your actual experience. This relaxation immediately makes more energy available because you're not spending it on internal resistance. Second, you begin to see your patterns clearly for the first time. When you're not caught up in fighting them or trying to change them, you can observe them with clarity and objectivity. This clear seeing is the beginning of natural transformation because you can't remain unconscious of something you're observing consciously. Third, you discover that change happens much faster when you stop trying to force it. When you're not creating resistance through effort, your natural capacity for growth and evolution can express itself freely. What used to take months or years of struggle can shift in moments through pure observation. Fourth, the changes that occur through watching are authentic and sustainable. When transformation happens naturally through awareness rather than artificially through force, it integrates seamlessly into your being. You don't have to maintain it through constant effort, because it has become part of who you naturally are. The shift from forcing to watching requires a fundamental change in your relationship with personal development. Instead of seeing yourself as broken and needing to be fixed, you recognize yourself as naturally whole and simply covered over by temporary patterns. Instead of approaching change as work, you approach it as a return to your natural state. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action in your life. The observer method isn't about becoming inactive. It's about acting from a different source. Instead of acting from force, struggle, and effort, you begin to act from clarity, inspiration, and natural flow. Your actions become more effective because they're aligned with your true nature rather than opposed to it. Watching beats forcing because force operates against the grain of consciousness, while watching operates with it. Force tries to overpower natural processes while watching allows those processes to unfold in their own perfect timing. Force exhausts you while watching energizes you because it connects you with the infinite source of awareness itself. In our next chapter, we'll explore the neutral zone, the specific space of consciousness where this effortless watching becomes possible and where all authentic transformation begins. There's a hidden dimension of consciousness that exists between wanting and having, between your current reality and your desired reality. This space doesn't get talked about in personal development circles because most people rush right past it in their eagerness to get somewhere else. But this space, what I call the neutral zone, is where all authentic transformation actually occurs. The neutral zone is not a place of emptiness or void. It's not about being emotionally flat or spiritually detached. It's a space of pure potential, where you're no longer identified with your current limitations, but you're also not grasping for a different experience. It's the eye of the hurricane, perfectly still, while everything else swirls around it. Most people never discover this space because they're either stuck in their current reality or desperately reaching for their desired reality. They're either resigned to their limitations or frantically trying to escape them. But the neutral zone exists in the gap between these two states, and accessing it requires a very specific shift in consciousness. Here's how most people operate. They look at their current circumstances and feel some combination of frustration, disappointment, or dissatisfaction. This creates a desire to be somewhere else, to have something different, to become someone new. Then they spend all their energy trying to bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. But this approach completely misses the space where transformation actually happens. The gap between your current reality and your desired reality isn't an empty space that needs to be filled. It's a fertile void where infinite possibilities exist. When you learn to rest in this gap, instead of trying to cross it, something magical happens. Instead of you changing your reality, reality begins to reorganize itself around your new level of consciousness. Think about the moment right before you fall asleep. You're not awake, but you're not yet asleep either. You're in a transitional space where the normal rules of waking consciousness don't apply. This is similar to the neutral zone. It's a transitional space where the normal rules of limitation don't apply either. In the neutral zone, you're not trying to convince yourself of anything. You're not affirming what you want or denying what you have. You're simply present with what is, without resistance and without attachment. This creates a unique state of consciousness where your identity becomes fluid rather than fixed. When your identity is fluid, transformation becomes effortless because there's no solid structure to maintain or overcome. Instead of being locked into patterns of I am this or I am not that, you exist in a space of pure being where anything is possible. You're not trying to become something different. You're recognizing the awareness that makes all becoming possible. This is radically different from how most people approach change. They try to jump directly from their current identity to their desired identity, like leaping across a canyon. But identities can't be jumped between. They can only be transcended by returning to the source from which all identities arise. The neutral zone is that source. It's the consciousness that exists before you label yourself as confident or insecure, abundant or lacking, successful or struggling. It's the awareness that remains constant whether you're experiencing limitation or freedom. And when you learn to rest in this awareness, you discover that you were never actually limited in the first place. Here's what makes the neutral zone so powerful for transformation. When you're identified with your current reality, you're operating from a fixed perspective that reinforces your existing patterns. When you're grasping for your desired reality, you're operating from want and lack, which actually pushes your desires further away. But when you're resting in the neutral zone, you're operating from pure potential. Pure potential doesn't have preferences in the way your personality has preferences. It doesn't resist your current experience or desperately want a different experience. It simply allows whatever is happening to be exactly as it is, while remaining completely open to whatever wants to emerge next. This allowing isn't passive resignation, it's active presence. You're not giving up on change or accepting limitation. You're creating the optimal conditions for organic transformation by removing all the interference that prevents it from happening naturally. You're like a gardener who prepares the soil perfectly and then trusts the seed to grow on its own. Most people are afraid of the neutral zone because they think if they stop pushing for change, nothing will happen. They've been conditioned to believe that constant effort and striving are necessary for growth. But the opposite is true. The more you push, the more resistance you create. The more you strive, the more you reinforce the gap between where you are and where you want to be. In the neutral zone, you discover that you don't need to push because consciousness has its own intelligence and its own momentum toward expansion. When you get out of the way, this natural intelligence begins to express itself through your life in ways that your limited thinking mind could never orchestrate. Accessing the neutral zone requires a very specific kind of letting go. You're not letting go of your desires or your goals. You're letting go of your attachment to how and when they manifest. You're not giving up on transformation. You're giving up on controlling the transformation process. This letting go feels scary to the mind because the mind's job is to maintain control and predict outcomes. But the mind's version of control is actually a form of limitation because it can only create what it has already experienced or imagined. The neutral zone gives you access to possibilities that exist beyond the mind's limited database. Here's how you know you're entering the neutral zone. First, the urgency disappears. You no longer feel like you have to change right now, or your life will be ruined. The desperate energy that drives most personal development efforts simply evaporates, and you find yourself feeling calm and patient with your current experience. Second, the internal argument stops. You're no longer fighting with your thoughts, battling your emotions, or resisting your circumstances. There's a sense of peace with what is, not because you've given up hope for something better, but because you've discovered that peace itself is the foundation from which all positive change arises. Third, your perspective begins to shift without effort. Instead of trying to see things differently, you naturally begin to notice aspects of your experience that were invisible before. Solutions appear, opportunities emerge, and new possibilities present themselves without you having to hunt for them. Fourth, you start taking actions that feel inspired rather than forced. Instead of pushing yourself to do things you think you should do, you find yourself naturally drawn to activities, people, and choices that align with your deeper wisdom. Your life begins to flow rather than struggle. The neutral zone isn't a destination. It's a way of being that you can access at any moment. It's not something you achieve once and then maintain forever. It's something you return to again and again, especially when you notice yourself getting caught up in forcing or grasping. Some people worry that operating from the neutral zone will make them complacent or unmotivated. But the opposite happens. When you're not wasting energy on internal resistance and struggle, you have much more energy available for inspired action. When you're not clouded by desperation and attachment, you can see opportunities and possibilities much more clearly. The neutral zone is where the observer method becomes practical and applicable to your daily life. It's the consciousness from which you observe your thoughts, emotions, and circumstances without being disturbed by them. And from this undisturbed awareness, transformation happens as naturally as flowers blooming in spring. There's a massive difference between hoping something is true and witnessing that it already is. Most people spend their entire lives in the first category, wishing, wanting, hoping, and trying to convince themselves that their desired reality exists somewhere in the future. But the observer method operates from the second category, directly perceiving what is already present right now, beneath the surface of apparent limitation. This shift from wishful thinking to witnessing truth is where the observer method moves from theory into direct experience. It's where you stop trying to create a new reality and start recognizing the reality that has always been available to you, but has been hidden by layers of conditioning, judgment, and misperception. Wishful thinking operates from lack. When you engage in wishful thinking, you're essentially saying, I don't have this thing I want, but I hope someday I will. This immediately creates a split between your current experience and your desired experience, and that split becomes the very thing that prevents you from accessing what you're seeking. Witnessing truth operates from wholeness. When you witness truth, you're recognizing what is already present in this moment, right now, regardless of how your circumstances appear on the surface. You're not trying to create something new. You're unveiling something that has been there all along, but has been obscured by your focus on what's missing. Here's the profound shift this creates. Instead of saying, I am wealthy, while looking at an empty bank account and hoping this statement will somehow become true, you begin to witness the abundance that exists in your life right now. Instead of affirming, I am loved, while feeling lonely and hoping someone will eventually care about you, you start to recognize the love that is already present in your awareness itself. This isn't about positive thinking or reframing your circumstances to look better than they are. This is about developing the capacity to perceive what is actually true at the deepest level of your experience, beyond the surface appearances that your conditioned mind focuses on. Your conditioned mind is like someone wearing tinted glasses who has forgotten they're wearing them. Everything looks a certain color, and they assume that's the natural color of the world. But when they remove the glasses, they see that reality was always much more vibrant and beautiful than they realized. The observer method is about removing the tinted glasses of conditioning so you can see what has always been true. The truth that you witness through observer consciousness isn't subjective or made up, it's more real than your surface circumstances. Your circumstances are temporary and constantly changing. Your true nature is permanent and unchanging. When you learn to witness from your true nature, you stop being at the mercy of temporary conditions. For instance, beneath every experience of lack is an awareness that remains untouched by that lack. This awareness has never been poor, has never been without resources, has never experienced true scarcity. When you witness from this awareness, you're not denying your current financial situation. You're recognizing the abundance that exists at the level of consciousness itself. Beneath every experience of loneliness is an awareness that is inherently connected to everything. This awareness has never been separate, has never been truly alone, has never been cut off from love. When you witness from this awareness, you're not pretending you have relationships you don't have. You're recognizing the connection that exists at the level of being itself. Beneath every experience of insecurity is an awareness that is inherently stable and confident. This awareness has never doubted itself, has never felt inadequate, has never needed validation from anyone or anything. When you witness from this awareness, you're not faking confidence. You're recognizing the unshakable certainty that exists at the core of your being. This is what makes the observer method so different from traditional affirmations. Affirmations try to convince you of something that contradicts your current experience. Witnessing reveals something that transcends your current experience without denying it. You're not trying to change your circumstances from the level of circumstance. You're recognizing your true nature from the level of consciousness. The shift from wishful thinking to witnessing truth requires a fundamental change in where you look for what you're seeking. Wishful thinking looks outside, to future circumstances, to other people's behavior, to external conditions changing. Witnessing truth looks inside, to the awareness that is reading these words right now, to the consciousness that makes all experience possible. This inward looking isn't selfish or narcissistic, it's recognizing the source from which everything else arises. When you find what you're looking for at the level of consciousness, it naturally begins to express itself at the level of circumstances. Not because you've made it happen, but because outer reality always reflects inner reality when there's no resistance blocking that reflection. Here's how you begin to make this shift practically. Instead of affirming, "I am confident," you begin to notice the awareness that is present right now, reading these words. This awareness isn't nervous or insecure, it's simply present, alert, and naturally at ease. You're not trying to become confident, you're recognizing the confident awareness that you already are. Instead of declaring, "I am successful," you begin to witness the consciousness that is successfully aware right now. This consciousness isn't failing at anything. It's perfectly accomplishing the task of being conscious. You're not trying to achieve success. You're acknowledging the success that is inherent in awareness itself. Instead of stating, "I am loved," you begin to observe the love that exists in the very fact of your existence. Something loves you enough to give you life, to provide you with consciousness, to allow you to experience this moment. You're not trying to attract love. You're witnessing the love that is already present in the miracle of your being. This shift from thinking to witnessing happens in layers. At first, you might only be able to recognize these truths for brief moments before your conditioned mind pulls you back into old patterns of perception. That's perfectly normal. The key is to keep returning to witnessing whenever you remember, without judging yourself for forgetting. As you practice witnessing more consistently, you begin to notice that what you witness in consciousness starts to manifest in your circumstances. Not through magical thinking or wishful manifestation, but through natural alignment. When you're no longer identified with lack, you naturally make choices that support abundance. When you're no longer identified with insecurity, you naturally act from confidence. When you're no longer identified with separation, you naturally attract connection. The beautiful paradox of witnessing truth is that you get what you're seeking by recognizing that you already have it at the deepest level. This isn't a mental trick or a philosophical game. It's a direct recognition of how consciousness actually works. What you are at the level of awareness inevitably expresses itself at the level of experience when there's no resistance blocking that expression. Witnessing truth dissolves resistance because there's nothing to resist when you're simply observing what is already present. Your mind can argue with affirmations, but it cannot argue with direct perception. Your doubts can question your positive statements, but they cannot question what you're directly witnessing in this moment. This is why the observer method creates such rapid and lasting transformation. Instead of trying to convince yourself of something your experience contradicts, you're recognizing something your experience confirms. Instead of fighting with reality, you're discovering the deeper reality that makes all surface realities possible. In our next chapter, we'll explore the specific tools and techniques that make this witnessing practical and accessible in your daily life. Now we move from understanding to application. Everything we've explored so far has been preparing you for this moment, where you learn the specific techniques that activate your observer consciousness and put the entire method into practical use. These aren't theory or philosophy anymore. These are tools you can use immediately to shift from the struggle of affirmations into the ease of witnessing. I'm going to share 3 specific observer techniques with you. Each one approaches the same fundamental shift from a different angle, so you can discover which resonates most naturally with your consciousness. These methods work because they align with how awareness actually operates, rather than fighting against your mind's natural tendencies. The first technique is called present moment witnessing. This is the foundation of all observer work because it anchors you in the only place where transformation can actually occur, right here, right now. Your thinking mind lives in the past and future, constantly comparing what was with what might be. But your observer exists only in this moment, and this moment is where all possibilities exist simultaneously. Here's how present moment witnessing works. Instead of making any statements about what you want to become or trying to affirm what you wish were true, you simply notice what is happening in your awareness right now. Not what happened 5 minutes ago, not what might happen tomorrow, but what is present in this exact moment. Start by noticing that you are aware right now. Don't think about awareness. Simply notice that awareness is present. You don't have to understand it, analyze it, or do anything with it. Just acknowledge that something in you is awake and alert in this moment. This awareness that you're noticing, this is your observer. Now notice what your observer is witnessing right now. It might be witnessing thoughts about this technique. It might be witnessing emotions about your life situation. It might be witnessing physical sensations in your body. Whatever it's witnessing, simply let it witness without trying to change what it sees. Here's the key part. As your observer witnesses what is present, notice that the observer itself is completely unaffected by what it witnesses. If it's witnessing worry, the observer isn't worried. If it's witnessing sadness, the observer isn't sad. If it's witnessing limitation, the observer isn't limited. The observer remains perfectly free, perfectly whole, perfectly at peace, regardless of what it's observing. This recognition is transformational because you begin to identify with the observer rather than with what is being observed. You realize that you are the awareness witnessing your thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. You are the consciousness observing your emotions, not the emotions themselves. You are the presence watching your circumstances, not the circumstances themselves. Practice this throughout your day. Instead of trying to change your experience, simply witness whatever is present from the space of your observer. Watch your mind without being controlled by your mind. Observe your reactions without being identified with your reactions. Notice your patterns without being trapped in your patterns. The second technique is called neutral acknowledgement. This builds on present moment witnessing by adding a specific way of relating to what you observe. Instead of judging what you witness as good or bad, right or wrong, desirable or undesirable, you acknowledge it with complete neutrality. Here's how this works in practice. When you notice a limiting thought, instead of fighting it or trying to replace it with a positive thought, you simply acknowledge it neutrally. You might say internally, I notice the thought that I'm not good enough, or I observe the belief that I can't succeed, or I witness the feeling of being stuck. This neutral acknowledgement does something remarkable. It creates space around the experience, rather than resistance against it. When you acknowledge something neutrally, you're neither feeding it with attention nor fighting it with resistance. You're simply allowing it to be present while maintaining your position as the observer. The power of neutral acknowledgement is that it dissolves the charge around negative experiences. Most limiting patterns gain their power from your resistance to them. When you stop resisting and start neutrally acknowledging, the pattern begins to lose its grip on you naturally. Practice neutral acknowledgement with everything you observe: thoughts, emotions, sensations, circumstances. Notice how different this feels from trying to change what you're experiencing. Instead of, I shouldn't be feeling anxious, I need to feel confident, you simply acknowledge, I notice anxiety is present. Instead of, I hate being broke, I need to be wealthy, you neutrally observe, I witness the current financial situation. This isn't passive resignation, it's active presence. You're not giving up on change. You're creating the optimal conditions for organic transformation by removing the resistance that keeps patterns stuck in place. The third technique is called essence recognition. This is the most advanced of the three methods because it involves recognizing the essence of what you're seeking that is already present in your current experience. This technique dissolves the gap between where you are and where you want to be, by revealing that what you're seeking is already here in a different form. Here's how essence recognition works. Instead of focusing on the specific form you think you need, more money, a relationship, a different job, better health, you identify the essence of what that form would give you. Then you look for where that essence is already present in your life right now. For example, if you want financial abundance, the essence you're seeking might be freedom, security, or the ability to contribute. Look for where you already experience freedom in your life. Notice where you already feel secure. Observe where you're already contributing value. The essence you're seeking through money is already present. You're just looking for it in the wrong place. If you want a loving relationship, the essence you're seeking might be connection, acceptance, or intimacy. Look for where you already experience connection in your life. Notice where you already feel accepted. Observe where intimacy is already present, even if it's intimacy with yourself, with nature, or with your creative expression. If you want better health, the essence you're seeking might be vitality, energy, or physical freedom. Look for where vitality is already flowing through you. Notice where energy is already present. Observe where your body is already functioning perfectly. Your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your cells regenerating. The key to essence recognition is understanding that the essence is always present, but it might not be in the form you expected. When you recognize and appreciate the essence in its current form, you create alignment between what you are and what you're seeking. This alignment naturally attracts more expressions of that same essence. Practice essence recognition by first identifying what you truly want from any situation, person, or circumstance you're trying to change. Look past the surface form to the underlying essence. Then become a detective for that essence in your current experience. The more you recognize and appreciate essence where it already exists, the more it expands and expresses itself in new forms. These three techniques work together synergistically. Present moment, witnessing anchors you in your observer consciousness. Neutral acknowledgement creates space around your current experience without resistance. Essence recognition reveals that what you're seeking is already present in some form right now. Use these techniques not as mental exercises, but as ways of being. They're not something you do for 10 minutes a day. They're ways of approaching every moment with observer consciousness. The more you practice them, the more natural they become, until witnessing becomes your default way of engaging with life. In our next chapter, we'll explore what happens when your old patterns try to fight back against this new way of being, and how to handle that resistance with the same observer awareness. Your mind is about to declare war on everything you've just learned. It's going to fight the observer method with everything it has, because this approach threatens the very foundation of how it has been operating your entire life. And here's what most people don't expect. This resistance isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's actually proof that you're doing something right. Your mind has spent years, maybe decades, perfecting the art of keeping you exactly where you are. It has developed sophisticated systems for maintaining your current identity, your familiar patterns, and your predictable responses to life. The observer method bypasses all of these systems, and your mind recognizes this as a direct threat to its control over your experience. So it fights back. And it fights dirty. The first wave of resistance usually comes in the form of doubt. Your mind will tell you that this observer stuff is just another personal development gimmick that won't actually change anything. It will remind you of all the other things you've tried that didn't work. It will point out that you're still in the same circumstances you were in before. So clearly nothing is really changing. This doubt feels reasonable and logical because your mind is excellent at making convincing arguments. But here's what you need to understand. This doubt isn't actually based on evidence. It's based on your mind's fear of losing control. Your mind would rather keep you stuck in familiar misery than risk the unknown territory of genuine transformation. When the doubt comes, don't fight it and don't believe it. Simply observe it with the same neutral awareness you've been practicing. Notice that you are the consciousness witnessing doubt, not the doubt itself. The observer can watch doubt without being overcome by doubt, just like a movie screen can display a storm without being damaged by the storm. The second wave of resistance often manifests as intensification of your old patterns. You might find yourself more anxious than usual, more depressed than normal, or more stuck than you felt in a long time. This isn't because the observer method is making you worse. It's because your old patterns are fighting for survival by becoming more dramatic and obvious. Think of this like cleaning out a messy closet. When you first start organizing, everything looks worse than when you began because all the hidden chaos is now visible. But this visibility is actually progress because you can't organize what you can't see. Your intensified patterns are becoming visible so they can finally be released. When your patterns intensify, resist the urge to panic or assume you're moving backwards. Instead, see this as an opportunity to observe more clearly. Your old patterns are essentially giving you a detailed demonstration of exactly what you're transcending. Watch them with fascination rather than fear, knowing that their intensity is actually a sign of their weakening grip on you. The third wave of resistance comes in the form of mental arguments about why the observer method can't work for you specifically. Your mind will tell you that your problems are too big, too complex, or too deeply rooted for this simple approach to handle. It will insist that you need more dramatic methods, more intensive therapy, or more complicated solutions. This is your mind's way of trying to pull you back into the familiar territory of struggle and effort. It's much more comfortable with you fighting your problems than transcending them through awareness. Fighting keeps you engaged at the level of the problem, while observing elevates you beyond the problem entirely. When these arguments arise, notice that they all have the same underlying theme. They're trying to convince you that you're an exception to how consciousness works. But consciousness operates the same way for everyone. Awareness is awareness, regardless of your personal history or current circumstances. The observer method works not because your problems don't matter, but because you are bigger than any problem you could ever have. The fourth wave of resistance often shows up as impatience and frustration with the process. Your mind will demand immediate, dramatic results. It will compare your progress to others, judge the speed of your transformation, and create urgency around changing faster than you're changing. This impatience is actually another form of force trying to reassert itself. Remember, the observer method works precisely because it operates outside the realm of forcing and striving. When impatience arises, it's your old forcing patterns trying to hijack your new approach. Simply witness the impatience without being controlled by it. Notice that your observer is perfectly patient because it exists outside of time, where there's no such thing as too slow or too fast. The fifth wave of resistance can be the most subtle and therefore the most dangerous. This is when your mind tries to turn the observer method itself into another form of doing rather than being. It starts creating rules about how often you should observe, techniques for observing better, or goals for what you're observing should accomplish. This is your mind's most sophisticated attempt to regain control. It tries to make the observer method into another system it can manage and manipulate. But the moment you turn observing into a technique you're performing, you've lost the essence of what makes it work. Observing is not something you do. It's something you are. When you notice your mind trying to systematize or perfect your observing, gently return to the simplicity of just being aware that you're aware. There's nothing to improve about awareness itself. There's no way to observe better or more correctly. There's only the recognition of what is already perfectly present. The final wave of resistance is often the most persistent. It's the voice that tells you to quit because nothing is changing fast enough. This voice will point to your circumstances as proof that the observer method doesn't work. It will use the apparent lack of external change as evidence that internal transformation isn't occurring. This resistance fails to understand that inner transformation always precedes outer change. But there can be a lag time between the two. You might experience profound shifts in your level of peace, clarity, and freedom, while your external circumstances remain temporarily unchanged. This doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening at the foundational level of consciousness first. Trust the process even when you can't see immediate external results. The observer method works from the inside out, not the outside in. When you truly shift at the level of consciousness, your external reality has no choice but to eventually align with that shift. But it happens in perfect timing, not according to your mind's impatient demands. Here's how to handle all forms of resistance with observer consciousness. First, expect resistance and welcome it as a sign of progress. Resistance only arises when real change is threatening to occur. If you weren't moving into new territory, there would be nothing to resist. Second, observe the resistance with the same neutral awareness you observe everything else. Don't try to overcome resistance, analyze it, or make it go away. Simply notice it, acknowledge it neutrally, and recognize that you are the awareness witnessing resistance, not the resistance itself. Third, remember that resistance is temporary, but the observer is eternal. Every wave of resistance will eventually pass, but your capacity to observe remains constant. Rest in this constancy while allowing the waves to move through your experience without disturbing your deeper stability. Finally, use resistance as practice. Every time your mind fights back, you have another opportunity to strengthen your observer consciousness. Every moment of doubt, every intensified pattern, every mental argument becomes raw material for deeper witnessing. The mind's pushback isn't your enemy, it's your teacher, showing you exactly where your awareness needs to expand and strengthen. Handle it with the same peaceful presence you bring to everything else, and watch it transform from an obstacle into an ally. Something extraordinary happens when you stop trying to change your life and start observing it instead. A silent revolution begins, so subtle that your mind barely notices it at first, yet so profound that it transforms everything from the inside out. This isn't the dramatic, effortful transformation that personal development promises. This is something far more powerful, change that happens naturally when you get out of your own way. The silent revolution doesn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic breakthroughs. It whispers rather than shouts. It flows rather than forces. It evolves rather than explodes. And because it operates below the radar of your thinking mind, it bypasses all the resistance that typically sabotages your attempts at personal change. Here's how the silent revolution works. When you observe your patterns without trying to fix them, those patterns begin to lose their unconscious hold over you. Not because you're doing anything to them, but because unconscious patterns cannot survive in the light of conscious awareness. They dissolve naturally, like shadows disappearing when you turn on a light. Think about what happens when you become aware of a habit you didn't know you had. Maybe someone points out that you always touch your face when you're nervous, or that you interrupt people when you're excited. The moment you become conscious of the pattern, it starts to change automatically. You don't have to force yourself to stop. Awareness itself begins to modify the behavior. The observer method applies this same principle to every aspect of your inner experience. When you observe your limiting thoughts without fighting them, they naturally begin to lose their power. When you witness your stuck emotions without trying to fix them, they start to flow and release. When you notice your constraining beliefs without arguing with them, they begin to dissolve on their own. This happens because patterns need unconsciousness to maintain themselves. They thrive in the darkness of automatic reaction, but cannot survive in the light of conscious observation. The observer method doesn't destroy your patterns. It simply brings enough awareness to them that they transform naturally. The first sign of the silent revolution is usually a shift in your relationship with your own thoughts. Instead of being caught up in every mental story, you begin to notice that thoughts are just temporary visitors in your awareness. You realize that you don't have to believe every thought that arises, respond to every mental suggestion, or take every internal narrative seriously. This creates an immediate sense of freedom because you're no longer at the mercy of your own thinking. You discover space between you and your thoughts, space where you can choose how to respond rather than automatically react. This space is where all authentic choice becomes possible. The second shift often involves your emotional experience. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions or trying to suppress them, you begin to feel them fully while maintaining your position as the observer. You realize that emotions are energy in motion, and when you don't resist that motion, they move through you naturally and complete their cycle. This transforms your relationship with difficult emotions completely. Instead of seeing anger, sadness, or fear as problems to solve, you recognize them as temporary weather patterns in the sky of your awareness. You can experience them fully without being defined by them, feel them completely without being controlled by them. The third area where the silent revolution manifests is in your decision-making process. Instead of making choices from anxiety, desperation, or old conditioning, you begin to make decisions from a place of clarity and inner knowing. You start trusting the wisdom that emerges from stillness rather than the urgency that comes from mental scrambling. These decisions feel different because they arise from your true nature rather than your conditioned patterns. They have a quality of rightness and flow that forced decisions never possess. You find yourself naturally gravitating toward people, opportunities, and experiences that align with your deeper truth. The fourth sign of the silent revolution is a shift in your energy levels. When you stop fighting with reality, resisting your experience, and trying to force change, enormous amounts of energy become available. Energy that was previously locked up in internal struggle gets freed up for creative expression, inspired action, and natural growth. You might notice that tasks which used to drain you now feel effortless. Relationships that used to require exhausting effort now flow naturally. Goals that used to feel like uphill battles now unfold with surprising ease. This isn't because your circumstances have necessarily changed, it's because you're approaching them from a completely different level of consciousness. The fifth aspect of the silent revolution involves your relationship with time. When you're not constantly trying to get somewhere else or become someone different, you naturally settle into the present moment. This present moment awareness reveals that everything you've been seeking through future achievement is actually available right now in some form. This doesn't mean you lose interest in goals or stop planning for the future. It means your goals become expressions of present moment inspiration rather than attempts to escape present moment dissatisfaction. You work toward things because it feels natural and joyful to do so, not because you need them to be okay. The beauty of the silent revolution is that it requires no maintenance. When change happens through force or willpower, you have to constantly maintain that change through continued effort. But when transformation occurs through awareness, it becomes integrated into your very being. It's not something you have to remember to do. It becomes part of who you naturally are. This integration happens gradually and organically. You might not even notice that you've changed until someone points it out, or you find yourself responding to old triggers in completely new ways. The transformation is so natural that it feels like you're simply returning to who you've always been underneath all the conditioning. The silent revolution also affects how others relate to you. Though they might not be able to put their finger on what's different, people sense the peace and authenticity that comes from someone who isn't trying to be anything other than what they are. This natural authenticity is magnetic in a way that forced positivity or manufactured confidence never can be. Some people around you might resist this change because it challenges their own patterns and assumptions. Others might be inspired by it and want to know what you've discovered. Both reactions are normal and part of the process. Your job isn't to convince anyone of anything, it's simply to continue resting in observer consciousness and allowing the silent revolution to unfold naturally. The most profound aspect of the silent revolution is that it reveals transformation was never actually about becoming someone different. It was always about recognizing who you truly are beneath all the layers of conditioning and limitation. The observer method doesn't create a new you, it reveals the authentic you that has been there all along. This recognition brings tremendous relief because you realize you don't have to earn your wholeness, achieve your worth, or create your completeness. These qualities are inherent in your very being. They don't depend on your circumstances, your accomplishments, or other people's opinions. They're simply what you are when all the false identities are stripped away. The silent revolution continues throughout your life, always deepening, always revealing new layers of freedom and authenticity. It's not a destination you reach, but a way of being that continuously unfolds. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to rest in observer consciousness and allow the natural transformation that awareness makes possible. In our next chapter, we'll explore how to operate consistently from this space of pure awareness, moving beyond the need for belief into the realm of direct knowing. There's a realm of consciousness that exists beyond the need to believe anything at all. Most people never discover this realm because they're so focused on trying to believe the right things, have the right mindset, or maintain the right attitude. But the observer method takes you beyond the entire realm of belief into something far more powerful, direct knowing through pure awareness. Belief is actually a form of limitation. When you believe something, you're accepting it as true without direct experience. You're taking someone else's word for it, or you're hoping that something is true without actually knowing that it is. Belief always contains an element of doubt because it's based on faith rather than direct perception. This is why belief-based approaches to personal transformation are so unstable. One day you believe you're worthy of love, the next day you doubt it. One moment you believe you can succeed, the next moment you're convinced you'll fail. Belief fluctuates with your mood, your circumstances, and your mental state because it's not grounded in direct experience. Pure awareness operates from a completely different foundation. Instead of believing something is true, you directly perceive that it is true. Instead of having faith in your possibilities, you witness your potential in real time. Instead of hoping for transformation, you observe it happening naturally through the power of consciousness itself. This shift from belief to direct knowing is profound because it's unshakable. You can doubt what you believe, but you cannot doubt what you directly experience. You can question what someone told you, but you cannot question what you are witnessing with your own awareness in this very moment. Here's how you begin to operate from pure awareness instead of belief. Instead of trying to believe you are worthy, you directly observe the awareness that is reading these words right now. This awareness has never been unworthy. Worthiness and unworthiness are just concepts that appear within it. The awareness itself is inherently valuable simply because it exists. Instead of trying to believe you are capable, you witness the consciousness that is successfully understanding these concepts right now. This consciousness isn't struggling to comprehend. It's effortlessly receiving and processing information. The capability you're seeking through belief is already demonstrating itself through your capacity to be aware. Instead of trying to believe you are loved, you recognize the love that is present in the very fact of your existence. Something loves you enough to give you life, to provide you with awareness, to allow you to experience this moment. This love isn't a belief, it's a direct recognition of the benevolent force that makes your existence possible. Operating from pure awareness means you stop trying to convince yourself of anything and start witnessing what is already obviously true. You don't need to believe in your wholeness because you can directly observe the undivided awareness that you are. You don't need to have faith in your potential because you can witness your consciousness expanding and recognizing new possibilities in real time. This creates an entirely different relationship with your spiritual and personal development journey. Instead of working on yourself, trying to improve yourself, or attempting to become someone better, you simply rest in the awareness that is already perfect, already complete, already everything you've been seeking through self-improvement. This doesn't mean you become complacent or stop growing. It means your growth becomes natural and effortless because it's emerging from wholeness rather than trying to achieve wholeness. You develop not because you're broken and need fixing, but because consciousness naturally expands and expresses itself in infinite ways. The shift from belief to pure awareness also transforms how you relate to challenges and difficulties. Instead of believing everything happens for a reason or trying to maintain a positive attitude about problems, you simply witness whatever is arising from the space of neutral awareness. This witnessing doesn't judge experiences as good or bad, it simply allows them to be present while recognizing the awareness that remains. Untouched by any experience, this creates tremendous resilience because your well-being is no longer dependent on your circumstances or your ability to believe the right things about those circumstances. Your peace comes from recognizing the awareness that witnesses all circumstances without being affected by any of them. Operating from pure awareness also changes how you approach your goals and desires. Instead of believing you can manifest what you want or having faith that the universe will provide, you recognize that desire itself is a movement of consciousness pointing toward its own expansion. You don't need to believe in your ability to create. You can witness creativity happening through you in every moment. This shifts your relationship with action from efforting to allowing. Instead of forcing yourself to take action based on beliefs about what you should do, you allow inspired action to emerge from the clarity of present moment awareness. These actions feel different because they're aligned with the natural movement of consciousness, rather than opposed to it. The most profound aspect of operating from pure awareness is that it reveals the illusory nature of most problems. Problems exist at the level of thought and belief, but they dissolve when met with the clarity of direct perception. What seems like a complex issue requiring extensive problem solving often reveals itself to be a simple misunderstanding when viewed from the perspective of awareness. This doesn't mean you ignore practical challenges or pretend difficulties don't exist. It means you approach challenges from a place of clarity and presence, rather than from anxiety and mental scrambling. Solutions emerge naturally from this clarity because you're not clouded by the mental noise that typically accompanies problem solving. Pure awareness also reveals the interconnected nature of existence in a way that belief never could. Instead of believing we are all connected, you directly perceive the one consciousness that is appearing as all seemingly separate experiences. This recognition naturally generates compassion, love, and understanding because you see through the illusion of separation to the unity that underlies all apparent differences. This understanding transforms your relationships because you're no longer relating from your personal story to someone else's personal story. You're relating from awareness to awareness, from essence to essence. This creates a depth of connection that transcends the surface-level interactions that characterize most human relationships. Operating from pure awareness requires a fundamental trust in consciousness itself. Not belief in consciousness, but trust in what you directly experience. This trust develops naturally as you spend more time resting in awareness and witnessing its inherent wisdom, love, and intelligence. You begin to trust that awareness knows what it's doing, that consciousness has its own intelligence that far surpasses your mental understanding, and that when you align with this intelligence, life flows in ways that your limited thinking could never orchestrate. This trust isn't blind faith. It's based on direct experience of how consciousness operates when you stop interfering with its natural movement. You witness repeatedly that awareness naturally moves toward greater freedom, love, and truth when it's not blocked by mental resistance. The invitation is to stop believing in your potential and start witnessing your actual nature. Stop having faith in transformation and start observing the transformative power of consciousness itself. Stop trying to maintain the right beliefs and start resting in the pure awareness that needs no beliefs because it directly knows its own infinite nature. This knowing isn't something you achieve, it's something you recognize. It's not something you develop, it's something you uncover. It's not something you become. It's what you discover you have always been, beneath all the layers of conditioning and limitation. In our final chapter, we'll explore how to integrate this awareness into every aspect of your daily life, making observer consciousness not just a technique you use, but the foundation from which you naturally operate. You now stand at the threshold of a completely different way of being human. Everything we've explored together has been preparing you for this moment, where the observer method transforms from something you do into something you are. This final chapter isn't about learning new techniques. It's about integrating observer consciousness so deeply that it becomes your natural operating system. Living as the observer means that witnessing becomes as automatic as breathing. You don't have to remember to observe your thoughts. Observation happens naturally. You don't have to try to stay present. Presence becomes your default state. You don't have to work at maintaining awareness. Awareness maintains itself because you've stopped interfering with its natural functioning. This integration doesn't happen overnight, but it doesn't take years either. It happens through a series of small, consistent choices to return to observer consciousness, whenever you notice you've been pulled back into old patterns of thinking and reacting. Each return strengthens your capacity to rest in awareness until eventually awareness becomes home. Here's how this integration unfolds in practical terms. Throughout your day, instead of being lost in thoughts about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow, you find yourself naturally present with whatever is happening right now. This isn't forced mindfulness. It's the organic result of recognizing that the present moment is where your true power and peace naturally exist. When challenges arise, instead of immediately going into mental problem-solving mode or emotional reaction mode, you first rest in the awareness that is witnessing the challenge. From this stable foundation, appropriate responses emerge naturally without the drama and struggle that typically accompany difficult situations. When people around you are stressed, anxious, or upset, instead of getting pulled into their emotional state or trying to fix their experience, you remain grounded in your observer consciousness. This creates a field of peace that often helps others naturally settle without you having to do anything at all. Your presence becomes a gift to everyone you encounter. When opportunities present themselves, instead of anxiously analyzing whether they're right for you or desperately grasping at them, you observe from the neutral space where clarity naturally arises. You can sense immediately whether something is aligned with your true nature or just appealing to your conditioned desires. Living as the observer transforms your relationship with work and career. Instead of forcing yourself through tasks that drain your energy or chasing goals that don't truly inspire you, you begin to naturally gravitate toward activities that feel like expressions of your authentic nature. Work becomes play when it's aligned with the natural movement of consciousness through you. It transforms your relationship with money and abundance. Instead of operating from scarcity and constantly worrying about not having enough, you rest in the awareness of the abundance that exists at the level of consciousness itself. This doesn't mean you ignore practical financial matters, but you approach them from a place of clarity and trust rather than fear and desperation. It transforms your relationship with your body and health. Instead of fighting with your physical form or trying to force it to be different, you witness your body with appreciation and care. You naturally make choices that support your well-being because you're operating from love and awareness rather than judgment and resistance. Most importantly, living as the observer transforms your relationship with yourself. The constant internal critic that used to run commentary on everything you did gradually fades into the background. The voice that told you that you weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough loses its power because you're no longer identified with the thoughts that create those experiences. This doesn't mean your personality disappears or that you become some kind of emotionless robot. Your personality remains, but it becomes an expression of your true nature rather than a prison that confines you. Your emotions continue to flow, but they move through you like weather patterns through an open sky rather than getting stuck and creating suffering. You begin to live with a lightness and spontaneity that you may not have experienced since childhood. Because you're no longer carrying the heavy burden of trying to maintain a false identity or constantly improve yourself. Enormous amounts of energy become available for creativity, love, and authentic expression. Your relationships naturally become more honest and intimate because you're no longer hiding behind masks or trying to be who you think others want you to be. You show up authentically in every interaction, which gives others permission to do the same. This creates connections that are deeper and more fulfilling than anything based on pretense or performance. Living as the observer also brings a natural sense of purpose and meaning to your life. Though this purpose isn't something you have to figure out mentally, it emerges organically from the natural expression of consciousness through your unique form. You find yourself naturally drawn to contribute to life in ways that feel joyful and meaningful. This contribution isn't driven by a sense of obligation or the need to prove your worth. It flows naturally from the recognition that you and all of existence are expressions of the same conscious awareness. Serving life becomes as natural as breathing, because you recognize that serving others is ultimately serving the one consciousness that you share with everyone and everything. The observer operating system runs on a completely different power source than the ego operating system. The ego runs on external validation, achievement, and comparison. It requires constant maintenance and is easily depleted. The observer runs on the infinite source of awareness itself. It needs no external fuel and is inherently sustainable. This shift in operating systems also changes how you handle setbacks and failures. Instead of taking them personally or using them as evidence of your inadequacy, you observe them as temporary experiences arising in awareness. You can learn from them without being devastated by them. Adjust your approach without questioning your worth. Living as the observer doesn't mean you never make mistakes or never experience difficult emotions. It means you experience these things from a fundamentally different position. You remain grounded in the awareness that witnesses all experiences without being damaged by any experience. As this new operating system becomes more established, you'll notice that life becomes increasingly effortless. Not because your circumstances become perfect, but because you're no longer fighting with reality. You flow with what is while remaining open to what could be, creating the optimal conditions for positive change to occur naturally. People will begin to comment on the peace and authenticity they sense in your presence. They might not be able to articulate what's different about you, but they'll feel the stillness and clarity that comes from someone who is no longer at war with themselves or their experience. The most beautiful aspect of living as the observer is that it's not a spiritual achievement or personal accomplishment. It's simply a return to your natural state of being. It's remembering what you've always been beneath all the layers of conditioning and confusion. It's coming home to yourself. This homecoming isn't a destination. It's an ongoing recognition that deepens and expands throughout your entire life. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to rest in observer consciousness and allow life to express itself through you with greater authenticity and freedom. You've learned that affirmations work backwards because they create resistance. You've discovered the observer that witnesses without fighting. You've experienced the neutral zone, where transformation happens effortlessly. You've practiced witnessing truth instead of engaging in wishful thinking. You've applied practical techniques that actually work. You've handled the mind's resistance with awareness. You've witnessed the silent revolution of natural change. You've moved beyond belief into direct knowing. Now you have everything you need to live as the observer. Not as someone who observes occasionally, but as the very awareness in which all experience arises and dissolves. This is your true nature, your original face, your deepest identity. Welcome home.